Howdy, folks. Welcome back to Toony Talk. This is Super Koopa TV. Today, I wanted to talk about Hey Arnold, the little show from my youth. Ran from 1996 to 2004, and I caught it. I would say from roughly 90, 98, 99 to about 2004. At least that's what I would have consciously remembered it being on. But I think in the early 2000s was when I really started to. It was on heavily at the time. They had a lot of back-to-back episodes, so I watched it a lot as a kid. Overall thoughts on the show, I'm going to probably sum it up in the beginning and in the end, but I do have a lot to say about this one because I watched almost all of it from start to finish as a kid, and then I've gone back and watched it as a nearly 31-year-old adult, and I've come to the conclusion that it's okay. It's easily a 6 or 7 out of 10 if I'm being generous. It's not terrible, but there are a lot of things that I have just sort of nitpicks about, and I'll get into those in just a second here. But the overall premise, you've got this guy named Arnold Shortman, this kid named Arnold Shortman. I think he's anywhere from 9 to 12. I don't know if they actually say at what point his age is, because I think he has a couple of birthdays in the show. I think he doesn't get older than 12, though. So I think he goes from 10 to 12, somewhere in that age range, elementary school range, which is ironic because that's how old I was when I was watching it. And he's got all of his friends, and they live in the city of Hillwood, Washington, which is a fictional sort of amalgamation of Oregon, Washington, Chicago, and New York City. And if you ask most people who are fans of the show, they will tell you that this is a city they wish was real and that they lived in, because the way they portray the environment is so wholesome for an urban setting. It's really great. It looks like a great place to live, despite the fact that it's basically a concrete jungle. I am not a city fan. I'm not a city person. I try to avoid the city like the plague because it's way too many people. It's way too congested. Forget about driving in any given city. I'm not a city guy. I'd rather be in and out of the city as soon as possible. It's too congested for me. It's not. Living in the city would be an absolute nightmare. You couldn't pay me. You could show up to my house with $1 million check and I would tell you to keep it. I would not go to a city to live, but I would love to live in a city that's like this. This is a city that looks safe and fun to raise kids in. Part of that might have to do with the show's soundtrack. I'm sort of getting the praises of the show out of the way before I get into my nitpicks right now. The show's soundtrack is great. Jim Lang's the composer. He knocked it out of the park. The best way to describe the show's soundtrack is sort of a jazz meets hip-hop style thing. Very 90s, but very fitting for an urban setting. Very chill. It adds a chill atmosphere, and that's a word you hear a lot of people to describe this show as chill. Because it's not over-the-top slapsticky and cartoony. It is very grounded, down-to-earth slice of life. Lots of drama, lots of serious scenarios. That's kind of how it's remembered. And the soundtrack lends to this very, very well, I think, personally. And also, the setting of Arnold's room whenever it's used is just... You can go on YouTube and find those videos, those chill music videos, and it's just Arnold's room recreated, and you're looking up out of his skylight there, and so many of us grew up, even myself included, wishing we had a room like that, because your room was kind of your room was your sanctuary as a kid. Your room was your fortress. It was where you could escape all the nonsense in the world around you. And his room embodied that. It was just nice and chill and away from it all. And he's got a wonderful view of nature. And he could even go out onto the roof and just listen to the ambience of the city. It was a perfect room. It really was. So many people wish that boarding house existed or that building existed because they wouldn't want to go to it and spend a night in that room because it just was awesome. So that was really cool. As far as characters, I like most of them. I do want to talk about Arnold himself because despite the fact that the show is called Hey Arnold, I really believe one of the biggest weaknesses of the show is Arnold himself. Now, Arnold is what I would refer to as a super altruist or an ultra altruist, to where he's so altruistic that it doesn't make sense for a kid his age. There are adults going to him for advice because he always knows the right thing to do or the right thing to say. It's a bit on the absurd side, and it tends to bother me, and I remember it bothered me as a kid as well, because it's a very unrealistic thing for a show that's trying to take itself so seriously, and I'll get into that later. For a show that's trying to take itself so seriously, having this character be this crazy altruistic doesn't seem realistic at all. It really doesn't. At that age, you can be above your time. You can be very moralistic, but your brain isn't fully developed, and yet adults are coming to you for advice. Like, what is that? It doesn't make any sense. If adults are going to kids for an advice, first of all, we're screwed. But second of all, it doesn't make any sense, because the kid doesn't have the life experience to be able to solve these issues. The only thing now you can argue the only thing he does is really remind them of sort of common sense solutions. But even then, why would you go to a kid for that? The thing I dislike about the Jungle movie, which is the second movie they have, is they have this entire reel of how many people Arnold has helped throughout the series, and it's a nice callback to the show, but it just reminds you how unrealistically altruistic he was. You see a lot of these sort of review slash retrospective sort of documentaries on YouTube that talk about the series, and they always mention how this series was so in depth and ahead of its time with the way that it dealt with deep issues on a kids show, and they just kind of sing the show's praises because of that. And the reason I have a problem with that isn't because it isn't true. I think there are elements of that that's absolutely true in terms of they did tackle some serious issues, but so did sitcoms of the time that were family sitcoms. It's just for a cartoon, there weren't a lot of cartoons doing it, especially aimed specifically at kids, and especially Nicktoons, which tended to be more on the Ren and Stimpy side of wacky, which I personally liked more, and I still like as an adult more than the dramatic stuff. Like, I like Doug, but I don't like it when it takes itself too seriously. I don't like when a cartoon, by nature of being a cartoon, takes itself too seriously. I think the joy of a cartoon is that you can do literally anything with your setting, with your characters, with your continuity. It's spontaneous, it's off the wall, it's slapsticky. That's what I go to a cartoon for. I know not everybody agrees with that, because animation is just another way of telling a story, and I think that's perfectly fine. But especially as a kid, my expectation is to laugh when I watch a cartoon and to be funny. That's why I watch stuff like Looney Tunes and some of the earlier Nicktoons. Rocko's Modern Life was really good for me, and I loved it for that slapsticky, off the wall, bizarre humor. Arnold has none of that. It has comedy, but the comedy is based on certain characters, and it comes from certain characters, as opposed to the cartoon nature of the show. The show tries to be very realistic. It doesn't get horribly slapsticky and, out of the realm of possibility. It stays very much. I can only think of a couple instances that were kind of cartoony, like the first Cheese Festival episode. They had Phoebe and Helga crash a bumper car, and the crash was very cartoony. And I think because it had to be, they couldn't afford for it to be graphic. They show them sort of with bandages and things, but it was the closest the show got to genuine slapstick, in my opinion. And the episode where they're fighting over the vacant lot and the bullies are beating the kids up, that was funny to me. So those episodes stand out, but there are a lot of episodes that just kind of get lost in the mist because they take themselves so seriously. There's a lot of episodes that take themselves seriously that have really, in my opinion, no reason to. Like the whole Sid being able to grow a giant pumpkin. I mean, he's trying to defy everybody who's telling him he can't do it, and he eventually does it. But I mean, it's just an episode about a kid trying to grow a pumpkin, for crying out loud. There's not a lot you can do with that, and that to me is just boring. There's some comedic elements to it that they put in there, but it's a boring premise. It's a premise that takes itself too seriously. It's trying to tell kids, you can do anything if you set your mind to it. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I heard that as a kid. You can do anything if you set your mind to it. Then I tried setting my mind to stuff and getting hurt all the time, and I decided, screw this. I'm not putting my mind to anything that's going to cause me to have broken limbs. Thankfully, I never broke any limbs as a kid, but I came close a couple times. It just takes itself so seriously. Like, there's the episode where Helga deals with talking to a therapist, and people laud that episode, or praise that episode rather, for being just so ahead of its time and so groundbreaking. And I'm just like, nah, I want to laugh. I mean, it's a fine episode. I think it handles its material well. I think it's well written, but it doesn't compel me. It really just doesn't compel me. It doesn't compel my comedically attuned mind who just wants that, who there's plenty of other shows where I can get drama. I never liked drama as a kid. I always loved comedy. And that's why I loved cartoons, because they were comedic and slapsticky. So whenever a cartoon tried to take itself seriously, I tended to disconnect from it. That's why I really didn't like As Told by Ginger, even though I watched it, because the storylines were at least well written in that, I felt. But with Hey Arnold, they might be well written, but they're not compelling. I'm not compelled to go along. I found myself rewatching and having to skip a whole bunch of episodes because I was like, "This, I know where this is going, and I don't like the way the show is taking the approach to it." The episode where he deals with the woman that's like Stephen King, where she's an author and she turns out to be a jerk, but his influence helps her to be better. It's like you can predict how that's going to end. Very easily, you can predict how that's going to end, and it ends how you would think. He ends up helping the author, getting her back on her feet, but it's like that's not a very realistic scenario. That's like something straight out of a movie where it's like the kid helped the adult to find the way. It's like kids aren't magic, you know? More often than not, kids are stupid. I was stupid as a kid. I did stupid things all the time that I got in trouble for. You know, that's a more realistic portrayal of childhood than they're super altruistic, super geniuses, and just I don't know. It takes me out of the whole experience. And that's why I like Gerald. I like Gerald in contrast to Arnold because Gerald is very down to earth, and he sometimes goes along with the altruistic stuff, but then other times he's like, dude, you need to relax and just go with the flow and just not care. You're a kid. I mean, that's why I really like Gerald. And I think my favorite character in the entire series is Helga Pataki. And it's not for the reason a lot of the video essayists will tell you, because they'll tell you that, oh, she's this feminist icon, you know, she's so strong and independent for a woman. And no, it's not that. She is strong. She's almost a bullyish character. She just doesn't give a crap. And that whole I don't give a crap attitude is presented in such a hilarious way. And the show plays it up in such a good way that whenever she's on screen, she steals the show. And her voice actress, what's her name? I want to get it right here because she nailed it in the. I didn't like the Jungle movie, but she nailed the return of that character. You can tell she had aged, but my gosh, she sounded great. Francesca Marie Smith, absolutely fantastic. Her and the lady that voiced Phoebe, they both. I mean, it was a return to form. Absolute return to form. Um, just a great character. Just a really great character. You can argue she was the secondary protagonist. They gave her so many episodes, and her whole will I won't I with Arnold. I mean, that could go either way. Sometimes it was funny, other times it was just kind of annoying. Most of the times it was funny though, especially when she would punch was it Stinky in the face? No, it wasn't Stinky. Stinky's a different character. She would punch that kid with the glasses voiced by Craig Bartlett in the face. And that was always hilarious. Today it's like, you can't do that. It's like, back then we didn't care. Like, that was cartoony. That was the type of stuff that I loved. So I was perfectly okay with that. It's like, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't. But overall, I mean, it's a watchable show. I'm not saying I wouldn't recommend it, but there are so many things that take me out of the experience on rewatch because I'm thinking about this and I'm going, wait, this is supposed to be, according to all these video essays, this is supposed to be this deep, altruistic, deals with hardcore issues shows, and yet some of the ways it deals with them are so terribly unrealistic that I can't wrap my brain around it. The way that the adults go to Arnold just doesn't make any sense. It didn't make sense when I was a kid either. Why are you going to a child for real life advice who has no life experience? He has a tremendous amount of common sense, more so than a kid that age typically has, which is very unusual and unexplained. But why are you going to him? It doesn't make any sense. You're a full-grown adult. There's other full-grown adults that you must know that have a degree of common sense. But no, the adults are often played off as they don't really know what they're doing. So, and that's a repeated theme in this show. So that's a bit of a thumbs down for me in that regard because that's not a balanced portrayal. They do some stuff for comedic relief because they remember, oh yeah, this is a cartoon. We need some funny. But it's not ultimately a comedy show. It's a slice of life / drama. And a lot of times it doesn't succeed for me personally in that. I'm not saying that's a general rule. I'm saying for me personally, it doesn't hit that mark. And that's where I don't really enjoy it as much as, even as much as I used to as a kid. As a kid, I could just kind of ignore it and just look for the funny moments. But as an adult, I really can't do that for some reason or another. Probably because my mind's more developed and I'm more critically looking at it. I mean, I critically analyzed shows when I was a kid too, and it was more for the visual stuff, trying to look into the visual stuff. Like I would look at it and say, "Oh, look at how ornate that door frame is." You know, like the one on the poster you're seeing. Stuff like that would catch my eye, and I'd go, "Wow, they really put a lot of detail into this." But as far as like story and characters, I wasn't really thinking about that as much. I started to as I grew, but I really wasn't at the time that this was airing, so it was always off to me. But I wouldn't be able to articulate at that age why, because again, small brain. So I think the coolest thing about the show is just the character designs. They go for designs of characters that are all sorts of wacky. And people try to use this to say, "Oh, it's an analog for nobody is perfect and race doesn't matter." And okay, maybe. I mean, I think the better analog for race doesn't matter is Doug, where characters are just wild colors. I see people criticize that a lot and go, "Why are the characters such weird colors?" But Jim Jenkins wanted to do that because he felt that he didn't want to bring attention really to race. He just wanted to say, yeah, people are different, but what matters is the type of individual that they are. And Arnold does this too. The kids all look like misshapen fruits, which is ironic because one of the first episodes, Arnold and Gerald end up dressing up as fruits downtown and get mistaken for drug dealers. Oh, it's hilarious. But that was actually a really solid episode. The first season was a lot better, in my opinion, than subsequent seasons. The first couple episodes of the first season, especially. But after that, they kind of stopped playing on the humor and went to more serious stuff. And then I was just like, nah, I'm not for it. I'd rather watch Angry Beavers or Rocco's. That's going to be more laughs. I'll watch this because it's on, but I'm looking forward to what's coming on after it more so than anything else. So that's kind of where that stands. But it's a solid 6, 7 out of 10. I think I'd give it a 7 just to be generous because it does do some things right, but I've got there's too many elements that just take me out of the series, and I really don't like the Jungle movie or the original movie. I that was pretty forgettable. But the Jungle movie especially, I just felt like the whole first half of that feels like a return to Hey Arnold, and then the whole second half was, this is all the things that we wanted to do with the show that we couldn't, or this is taking one of Arnold's fantasy sequences and stretching it out into an entire movie, and I'm not a big fan of that. I just am not. I'm okay with the voice changes because these characters are kind of blank slates being kids, so you need kids of that age to be able to voice them, except for, Phoebe and Helga, which you could argue they could replace at this point too. But the voice change for Arnold is okay. The voice change for Gerald is okay, despite the fact that the kid voice acted Gerald so long that he went through puberty, and now Gerald sounds like he stopped going through puberty and regressed back. It's a little weird, but I mean, they do what they gotta do, I guess. But I'm actually more surprised that the Jungle movie didn't lead to a reboot with all the praise that it got. You'd think that something that gets a lot of praise would end up being rebooted and put on Nickelodeon and Paramount Plus, but as it turns out, I guess it was just a one-off thing like most of these, and I think we're trying to gauge interest to see what people wanted. And they ended up rebooting Rugrats instead, so it is what it is. And I'm sure they'll reboot As Told by Ginger at some point too. That show is, oh, I dread the reboot of that. That's going to be so ideological and political. Ugh. So, anyways, solid 6 out of 10. I think its fan base, it's got a beloved following, and I think that it's fine if you like the show, and I'm not saying I vehemently dislike it, but I take the same approach I took when I was a kid, which is if it was on, I watched it. But it wasn't really more than that for me. It was just kind of there. It was such a mixed experience per episode that I couldn't justify saying I was a fan of it, but I also couldn't justify saying I hated it. There was better stuff on for me at the time, but Hey Arnold was, and a lot of it was my sister liked it too, so we had one TV or two TVs at the time, so we, instead of fighting over the TV, we had to find common ground, and we ended up finding common ground very quickly with a lot of the Nicktoons. So, I mean, it is what it is. As I got older, I got my own TV eventually, my own TV in my room, and that was that. And then it is what it is. But Not a terrible show. It's a show that's of its time. It's one of the last '90s classics. I think that, like I said, I think the earlier stuff is better than a lot of the newer stuff, where it starts to get a little bit deeper. It Yeah, I just, there's not a whole lot left to say. I think I've said pretty much everything I've got, other than I think it's worth a watch, but it's hard to say, because I'm so in between with it. It's hard to say how I really feel, because all of the stuff that I mentioned that I've got a nitpick with is a problem for me, and it takes me out of the experience. But I still can watch at least some of the episodes. There are some episodes that stand out to me, like the one with the vacant lot, the one with the well, actually, there's two of the vacant lot. I should specify the one where they're playing football in the vacant lot with the two bullies. That one, and then the ghost train one is actually a pretty big departure from what the series has done before. I thought that was pretty solid. It's a pretty good showcasing Helga, the range of Helga's character. Episodes featuring Helga tended to not be very bad at all, but episodes centered around Arnold just weren't great. So, anyways, that's my thoughts on Hey Arnold. Let me know what your thoughts and memories are in the comments. I will see you guys next time. This has been Super Koopa TV with another edition of Toony Talk. God bless. Have a good one. Peace.